And we were one of the early adopters. So we talked with many of the partners directors on what is the course we're going to take. And that's not only to Microsoft 365 Copilot, but also because of Harvey, because of our connection with OpenAI and implementation of OpenAI. So we think we're going ahead of the curve, and that's being seen by our employees. And they love that they can bring that to our clients as well.
Somehow we've all been used to using software as something that's very predictable, that's very systematic. We know that if we push that button, this happens. Now we're getting to generative AI. It's obviously the opposite, right? It's a completely open interface and anything can happen.
Where the AI becomes in the loop wherever it's necessary or wherever it adds value to the human. And I think that's a different type of mindset when you're talking about the implementation of AI, and one that I see more fit because it also makes you think more as an organization, how does this increase the employee experience?
Welcome to Lead with AI, a podcast in which I speak with business leaders bringing AI to their work, teams, and organizations. And in today's episode, I speak with Marlene de Koning, a director at PwC Netherlands, where she leads the HR tech and digital team within their people and organization practice. With additional experience at tech giants LinkedIn and Microsoft, and as an author and sought-after speaker on HR tech strategy and digital transformation, Marlene brings invaluable insights on how to successfully scale AI adoption from pilot to enterprise-wide implementation. In this episode, you'll learn how to set up diverse and intelligent AI pilots, the key to scaling AI adoption across thousands of employees, practical strategies for integrating AI into daily workflows, methods for cultivating AI influencers within your organization, how to balance experimentation with strategy in AI implementation, and PwC Netherlands' innovative AI in the loop approach for ensuring fairness. Whether you're just starting your AI journey or looking to scale your existing initiatives, Marlene's experience leading PwC Netherlands transformation will provide you with actionable insights that you can apply in your organization. So let's dive in. Hey Marlene, thanks so much for being on today.
You're welcome. Happy to be here today.
Great to have you. So you are now very famous, at least in my LinkedIn feed, because you did with PwC in the Netherlands, you ran a Microsoft Copilot adoption. Now, many companies and especially many enterprises are talking about AI and maybe thinking about AI, maybe even dreaming about AI, but you've actually done it. So I'm super curious just about some practical lessons from that implementation. What was the original approach? What steps did you take? And maybe any lessons learned along the way?
Yeah. So first, to clarify, my role is focused on our external clients. So I run Copilot at our external clients, and our Chief Digital Officer is responsible for the Copilot rollout internally. But because we like to learn from each other, from what we do internally and externally, I'm also part of the AI steering committee and helping out on that regard. And we were one of the early adopters. So we talked with many of the partners directors on what is the course we're going to take. And we started in November 2023, with around 300 AI enthusiasts, a pilot. And those were the experimenters to see what can this product bring us within the organization, and to test the feasibility, the usability, the effectiveness, and what are the various scenarios where we could leverage Copilot for, and what are the tasks that it potentially could take over from our people. And then we decided to scale. So the first wave was around 2,000 people a few months after. So we went to mainly in our tax and advisory practice. And then the second wave, we went to 4,500 people. And now in September, the next wave will come, where we scaled even further. And if you think about our business, it makes a lot of sense because there's a lot of tasks where Copilot could be used in a very good way to make us more efficient. And also, I think one of the things that we also see, it's really reflecting on us that we were so early on. Because we did our annual people survey this year, especially amongst our junior colleagues or our associate level colleagues. They were very enthusiastic. They scored very high on engagement because of the innovation. And that's not only to Microsoft 365 Copilot, but also because of connection with OpenAI, implementation of OpenAI. So we think we're going ahead of the curve, and that's being seen by our employees. And they love that they can bring that to our clients as well.
That's incredible. So if there was ever a rallying cry for companies to adopt AI, If only it were for the fact that people in the organization see that as, okay, we're moving early, we're ahead of everyone else. Like, that's exciting. It's exciting to be part of a company that's moving ahead and being ahead rather than following behind. There was a lot in there that you just shared. Very curious about some of those steps. And I know that you're involved in another aspect of the AI rollouts, but how were those first 300 people picked? Because a lot of people that are listening, they're going to be at different stages of AI adoption. So, some may have experimented a little bit, maybe a little bit more advanced. What would that first step look like? How do you get to 300 people in an organization to say, yes, I want to join on this AI journey?
I think within many organizations, you might have more than 300 people that raise their hand and say, yes, I want to be on a journey, especially in companies like ours. But I think there are a few things that are important when selecting. It's selecting different type of departments, so you can actually learn how it's been helpful within those certain departments. So that's definitely one of these. So at the early stage, also, we were thinking about the confidentiality levels of data. So where will you use it and where won't you use it? So that was also a reason to exclude certain departments within our organization in the first pilot, because those were things that we still had to uncover to think about what our policies are and these type of things. Then you want to think about the levels. So you want to include leadership, because in the end, those also enable others to continue the usage and the adoption. And then we looked a bit at the AI mindset. So are there more experimenters, more innovators, more agile users? So what type of users do you have? And we also looked at the businesses where people are in. So how that's going to facilitate that. And also for organizations that want to start, these are definitely steps that you want to take into account, as well the data governance, because I think that's also one of the things that organizations tend to struggle with when scaling AI.
Okay, so we definitely have to talk about the data privacy and ethics part of it. But what you just mentioned in terms of, you basically had 4 criteria to look at. So how many people work in PwC in the Netherlands?
Around 6,000, and we rolled it out. So globally, many more territories are implementing Copilot. The Netherlands was ahead of the curve, or still is ahead of the curve with the scale. So that's what we like as well, of course. But we started with around 300 out of those approximately 6,000. Yeah.
Right. And so out of all the people that raised their hand and said, I want to be a part of it, you actually made the very intentional decision to look at, we want to have representatives from different seniority levels, different roles in the business, different levels of AI mindset even. I thought that was a really interesting one. So how did that come about? Is it a framework that PwC had developed globally and you adopted it, or is this something that was developed in the business here?
I think a lot is coming from our former chief digital officer, Marcel Jacobsen. He did a lot of this in this capacity. And I think the AI mindset is coming to something that we also bring to our clients, which is more on assessing the psychological behavior. What type of people do you have within the organization? And then how can you leverage that when you're looking for the influencers and scaling the AI within your organization?
So maybe let's switch a bit more to your world. So now you have this kind of first-hand experience of how to set up a pilot and how to get the first people in, and then eventually to that bigger group. So when you're now talking to clients, where do they stand in their decision-making process of like whether or not to adopt AI? Are they already experimenting? And then are you able to help them on that trajectory, kind of following some of the best practices from your own pilot?
I think it definitely helps that we've experimented ourselves, and also that we are a very high regulatory organization. That also helps in the conversation with clients on how to mitigate these risks, how to think about more responsible AI and these type of things. But also that we took the leap of faith, right? Because not everything could be measured in the early stages. And I think we're getting to more measurements the longer you're using, and you can pivot and tweak a bit. But in the early stages, we took a leap of faith. And that is something that many organizations struggle to, right? What is the business case? How is this going to bring value? How can we prove that it brings value to our organization? So within the 6-week program that we developed, that we bring to our clients, and it can be a little more or less dependent on what the organization wants, but it's all about what are the different type of use cases. So where in your business will it bring what type of value? So you can imagine that it also is different for commercial organizations than for public sector. Is the AI intended to deliver a higher productivity and directly influence your P&L? Or are you looking for reducing the work stress of your employees, reducing complex sick rates? What is the intention why you're implementing AI within your organization is one of the first questions that you need to answer. And then see what are the business use cases that it could be used for. And then in case of Copilot, we also do a measurement program within that. So we've developed a measurement framework where we both look preferably at quantitative and qualitative data for our clients. Yeah, and then you can go as in-depth and crazy if you want with measurements. So normally we do a comparison study, but you can even do a crossover study. And then, of course, the time takes longer because it's more intense dependent on the measurement framework you set. And then, of course, adoption is a very big part of it. And I think that is different for different type of organization, because if you have a low data literacy and a low digital literacy within your organization, the adoption is way harder and also dependent on the trust level that people have in AI. Because if the trust is low in AI and the communication is not great, then you can buy the best AI or build the best AI there is. But if nobody is using it, then you won't reach those results. So how do you then bring them on an adoption journey? And that's where, again, the AI mindset in helping understand what type of people you have within the organization can really help. And then you can do adoption games, and then you can do the prompt classes and these type of things for individual effectiveness, but also equipping really the leadership in how do they help the organization adopt this part of the program. And then I think the last thing that is really a prerequisite is the cybersecurity and the governance, because that's preventing organizations also for reputational damage or other type of damage, right?
Yes, we can just imagine all the bad things that can happen. So when companies come to you, have they already decided that they want to implement AI and therefore they want to work and say, we're going to roll out that 6-week program that you mentioned? Or is it also typically to consult on whether AI even makes sense for them, maybe based on things like the digital literacy and the particular goals that a company has?
So we do both. And we have also a big data and AI team and a cyber and security team within PwC, where we do the full AI strategy for organization. My team is mainly focused on the human side of it. So if you think about even other AI tools or about the AI strategy that organizations are set, we're looking way more on what is the impact on the people. So how do you measure that business value, but also how do you do the adoption and change program? And then because Copilot is such a workforce transformation for the organization and an adoption to all, that sits within my team. But if you think about the more general and way more complex and different AI systems, we have different teams for that.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And then to answer your question on if companies come to us, they come to us in different types of maturity stages. So some did a pilot, or there's a very enthusiastic IT team that worked with a company such as a Microsoft, and they did a pilot. And then, so how then do you go from experimentation to scale? And I think that's where the experimentation phase, if you have enough enthusiasts in the organization, that happens. But then how do you go to scale and how do you work with the board? And on one hand, if you think about the research that we do as PwC, CEOs say that they need to innovate, that their company is being disrupted in the next 3 years to come. But then how do they act upon that, right? And how does this then contribute to the ambitions and the goals that they set? That's what they need help with. And that's where they oftentimes go to us for.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. They may have done that initial pilot and that was something that they could execute internally. But then it gets to the, okay, now you've won over the people who were already won over. They were already excited, right? At least to some degree. Now you got to reach the other people. And that's similar to when you went from the maybe 300 people to the 2,000 people, eventually to the 6,000 people. What are some of the steps that you see there as being very effective and very impactful when it comes to getting more people on board beyond those initial enthusiasts?
Well, I think bringing those on board and understanding who are the influencers are that people are actually going to use it and also continue to use it. Because if you go to a bigger scale, a big risk is if you don't have a great adoption setting, that people use it once, that the AI doesn't live up to the expectations, and then people then will stop. And especially if you look at the current marketing initiatives around Gen AI, it promises the world. But then the product truth is not always there yet, or it's hard to get there. So it takes some skills and some practice in order to get to the best result. So how do you then bring people on that journey that they need to do it multiple times before they get to a better result and become more eloquently in working with the AI? And that's not necessarily something that comes natural to many people. And that's what you see with other implementations of technology as well, of course, and there it can get stuck. If you think about other technologies, we've been buying a lot of them and a lot of systems the past years as organizations, but they didn't necessarily communicate with each other. And actually, they made the work of people more complex. And that made it more frustrating. And that's also why adoption sometimes stagnated within the organization. And AI could be actually an answer for this, especially if you think about things like within Copilot Studio, you can enable that it takes an action for you. So you might not have to go to a different type of system, but you can stay in your flow of work, type something in Teams that then will fill out a form for you. And the prompt asks you a question back, and they will fill out the right fields in the back-end system, which of course enables a more seamless employee experience for people. But that requires as an organization that you set your strategy first in what type of AIs are we going to implement? And how are they going to communicate with each other? And I think that is, if you're going from experiment to scale, one of the big things that you need to think about in how do we make it more seamlessly for end users? And then how do we integrate that into a full strategy?
And it's usually then when companies find out, as I hear from many experts, that we don't actually really know what the workflows are of a typical employee, especially at scale. We don't really have any clear insight into, okay, this is typically where they spend their time, and therefore we can speed up their work or make it more joyful and make it better by implementing AI. And now obviously we've seen some integrations, like ServiceNow is now integrated with Copilot, and we've seen the Workday integration. So we're starting to get to this point where, okay, maybe I type something in Teams and then all kinds of things happen in the backend, and that's very beneficial to me. But like you said, still that requires some education. Somehow we've all been used to using software as something that's very predictable, that's very systematic. We know that if we push that button, this happens. With, predictive AI, even that was the case. Now we're getting to generative AI. Is obviously the opposite, right? It's a completely open interface and anything can happen. So what are some things that companies can do as they're thinking about that leap from maybe that first experiment to scaling, to make sure that people, you mentioned prompting classes, for example, like to make sure that people understand that this is a teammate and you need to communicate it almost in human-like language, and you need to not prompt, but delegate, right? You need to actually be clear in what you're trying to get out of it to get the right output. So what are some things that you're then putting in place with your clients or with your teams to make sure that people get to that maybe mindset shift in how to use AI?
Yeah, so we have also developed a few games, right, where people can like escape room type of games and things like that. Our organizations that work with us can implement that, and that people through playing learn how a Copilot or learn how a system works, right? So then you take off already the first barriers on where's that button, how do I click? Like it can be as simple as that people don't know where to find it, and then the barrier becomes higher the more it's becoming democratized, that people think that everybody knows how to work with it greatly except them. So then questions become harder. So if you bring that, and then if you bring more learning into a day-to-day, and you have the team learning, right, and also equipping the leadership in asking the questions. So you think about myself, I work with a lot of junior people within our organization where I review the work. And before we had Copilot or Harvey and some of the other tools that we used, differently than I review now. So now I ask if they have a question, if they also ask the same question to Copilot, right? Or to chat PwC, which is our internal on-demand Q&A basically, where people can then soundboard with first before they come to me, right? And then also before they submit a presentation to me, they can have it reviewed by Copilot and see if there are spelling mistakes or how to rephrase things or how to do things differently. And that really helps me because it saves me time that everything is way more complete before it comes to review. And I think that opens up also for our entire leadership more time to do other things where they normally spend it on review. But it asks something from you to not just start reviewing, but to go back. So it's behavioral change that every time you need to remind yourself of. And the same goes for meeting summaries or all these things. If you forget to turn it on, then you don't have the summary, right? And those are the little things that people forget in their day-to-day. So you really want to make it an integrated part of the daily life of people. And I think that's the hard part with all technologies. But the beauty of things like Copilot is in your workflow. So it is in Excel, it is in PowerPoint, it is in Outlook. So it is in all the tools that you work on a daily basis. So it makes it more easy for people to do the same work, but slightly different in the same look and feel in the same surroundings.
Yes.
So
there's some nudges to get you to adopt AI and make it a habit. So we've seen from the Microsoft data that the power users get exponentially more benefit out of AI. So we want people to use it, have many use cases for it, use it very frequently. I think the Moderna CEO said in that interview that, he's saying 20 times per day or more, right? That should be the benchmark. So obviously it's already in your workflow if you're using something like Copilot, maybe with PwC or Harvey, that may not be the case. What are some things that you can put into place that people actually make this a habit, that they all become power users?
We did a few things, especially in the beginning. We had a weekly winner, basically, where everybody could submit cases on how they used Copilot. And in the beginning, those cases were less sophisticated, right? Because it was the first week. Yeah. And then we had winners and they could win just small things, but it was more to enthusiasts. But we shared all those prompts and the outcomes with other people. So they learned what others were doing and how they were successful and what it brought to them. And these became more sophisticated. And the business unit that I'm part of, we have been fully deployed. So we now move to a monthly sequence. But we're also having a prompt library, and we have a PwC global prompt library. We share across territories what is working for us and how people could benefit from it. And then also thinking through the daily work that people do, right? And what are the tasks within that daily work that you can automate? So, for example, we do a lot of workshops for our clients, and then you come home and you have a lot of output of those workshops, right? So,
all
and
the
then
notes.
All the notes,
all the transcripts
everything.
Even,
and it needs to be bucketed, and it needs to be a write-up that goes to clients. But actually, you can have those workshops summarized, right? And you can leverage AI through that process in making that detailed output to your clients, which saves us a lot of hours. So thinking through those simple things where you do it on a daily basis. And also we do many surveys where we need to analyze all the open comments. Yeah. Well, actually, that's also something where AI can save us a lot of work. So thinking through what is our day-to-day uses. And then maybe we did it for an employee experience survey. But then if you send out to everybody, like we did it for that one, the majority of the people are very smart in our organization. So then they think, hey, we do other type of surveys, but we do also open comment analysis. So how can we leverage then the same type of thing for it, right? So you create enthusiasm and a buzz. And I think one other thing is the change agents or the influencers, these type of things. So that are within the organization. So we have them on all levels as well. Then they are influential within their sphere as well. And it's not only coming from the top down is very important, at least what we see as well.
I see a couple of pillars there in terms of it's not only looking at people's individual workflows, but also looking at the type of work we do as an organization. There's a lot of surveys, a lot of workshops that need to be read and analyzed so we can share some common best practices. And then again, once you sort of see that as an incentive, it's really the carrot, not the stick, right? It's like, okay, of course I want to do that work quicker. Of course I don't want to do that manually. So then eventually you're going to go over. And then this idea of tapping also into leaders to say, coach or motivate your people to submit work to AI before they submit it to you, right? That's a win-win for both because they get immediate feedback rather than whenever you get around to it. And you get better work submitted to you once it's been through a couple of rounds of maybe Copilot. And then finally, this idea of the influencers, which I think is really interesting. So maybe we can spend a few minutes on how do you create these influencers or how do you find them and then how do you cultivate them, right? How do you make sure that they stay enthusiastic even if they get the 20th question about, well, I know you understand AI. How do I do this? How do I do that? How do you make sure that they have the time for that or they have the energy for that or the continued enthusiasm for AI?
I think the last part you can easily mitigate by making sure that you have virtual office hours or the type of things that rotate between these people. So you take away a little bit of that type of burden that might not be as fun. But I think finding the right people is the more interesting part in this case. And that's not an organization choose different type of approaches. Now I'm also leading our people analytics team in PwC. So we love more organizational network analysis and then do a data analysis on who the actual influencers are, which is a more depth analysis and takes more time and resources to do so. But then you can actually find who is in most contact with whom, right? And how much.
Yeah.
And then you can really identify those influences within your organizations. And if you can put those people as change agents, then you see a huge uptake normally in adoption, regardless of technologies or what type of things, because they just influence people in a natural way, and they're natural influencers without ever being asked. So if you then ask them to do something, that can be magical for your organization. But normally we ask who influencers are or who are enthusiasts. And then I think it's also to the benefit of the organization to recognize the work that people do for the organization. Yeah. And to put them in the spotlight or to thank them for the work that they do next to their work, and that it doesn't become a commonality, because people love normally what they do, but they like to be called out on it as well in a positive way.
So a bit of recognition goes a long way to cultivate the influencers and to keep them excited about AI. I can imagine that at some point it's going to be a bit of a burn as well when you constantly get asked about these, maybe too simple questions. But keeping them excited and putting them in the spotlight, it sounds like that helps a lot as well.
Yeah, and to counter that, I think what I see that our change agent also are getting are the difficult questions. Is the more things
the challenging,
that they can innovate or that they never understood what their colleague was doing in their workflow, and that you now all of a sudden understand what a team workflows is and how a Copilot studio can help actually in part of that task automation, and you can equip a full team. So there are also these type of questions that are coming, which are a bit more challenging and hopefully more than the burdensome ones to balance it out, I would say.
That's amazing. There's definitely one question I want to ask you before we close out, which is that you wrote a book called HR Tech Strategy. And one of the core pillars in the book is really around this idea of fairness. And now we've spoken a lot about AI and all the adoption practices. I just had Helen Kapli and Nicole Sterling from Women Defining AI on a couple of weeks ago. We also talk about the fact that the data is showing that women are taking up AI less than men. Somehow in our community is quite balanced, but broadly, the data shows that women are taking it up less than men. And then we have the additional difficulty that the AIs typically have been designed and written and compiled by men, and therefore there is some bias kind of inherent in the model. One of the tips that they gave is to make sure that at least at a company level, when you're putting together, let's say, this group of 300 or 2,000, that you also look for, diversity, and that you make sure that everyone is included and that there is a diverse set of opinions and ideas around AI. What are some things you've put into place, as clearly this topic is near and dear to your heart as well?
Yeah, I think in PwC, we talk a lot about the responsible, so the ethical and the moral part of the framework, but also we recently launched a paper, I think last week, around trustworthiness versus trust in AI, and that we don't talk. So what you hear a lot of other organizations talk about is the human in the loop, but actually we start talking about the AI in the loop. So how do you...
Oh, I love that. Explain that. That sounds very fascinating.
I think it is. And it is where you want to integrate the AI into human processes. So if you think about what we're doing is we have tasks where we want those to be automated by AI. So that means that the human is always in the lead and running it, where the AI comes in the loop wherever it's necessary or wherever it adds value to the human. And I think that's a different type of mindset when you're talking about the implementation of AI, and one that I see more fit, because it also makes you think more as an organization. How does this increase the employee experience? How do we help and enable our employees, right? Because basically why we're doing this is to make our lives better, or that's why we should be doing this.
Yes.
So if you can bring that more into it, and then of course you always have those risks of what you were just referring to, the biases also in terms of culture, right? That is more trained on Anglo-American data. So it's owned by the bigger tech companies. So those are all things that you want to take into consideration as an organization. What do I own? How can I leverage potentially the model, but make it more bespoke for my organization? So our policies, our culture can be fed in it. And how can I make a more specialized model that reflects more of what we as an organization need? Are then questions that you can ask yourself and also work with. Yeah.
And that would allow you to rebalance maybe the current status quo and tip it more towards where you need it to be. I love that idea of the human in the loop versus the AI in the loop. And I'm sure a lot of people find that very reassuring, that idea that, no, we still lead. We don't need to be in the loop, we lead. So I have 3 rapid fire questions at the end of the interview. So number 1 is going to be just your favorite AI tool.
Copilot in Teams.
Second question, your favorite AI tool besides Copilot and Teams?
Copilot in Teams.
Okay. Sold. Unique use case for AI in your daily routine. You've talked already about a bunch, but anything like in your daily work where you're looping AI in?
I think in everything that can be automated, ideal situation is to have the AI work really as a digital version of myself that takes away all the routine tasks and where I can focus on all the things that are more joyful for me. So wherever I can implement AI and it's in a safe environment, I try to implement that. So not a very unique case. I think it's just a more mundane, and that's what I like.
Yeah. But a beautiful end vision that eventually you have a digital version of yourself that can take care of all the toil. Finally, what's the one thing that any business leader should do tomorrow to get themselves and their teams onto the benefits of AI?
There's no such thing as one thing that organizations should do. But if I need to narrow down, I would say strategize and experiment. These go hand in hand because you just don't want to solely experiment without having the strategy. But you also don't want to set only a strategy without ever starting the experiment. So I think those really go hand in hand, and next to the data governance, the security, the responsibility, and all the other things we talked about today.
Sounds perfect. Okay, strategize and experiment. Marlene, thanks so much for being on.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you for joining us today as we heard about scaling AI from pilots to enterprise-wide implementation with my guest, Marlene de Koning, HR Tech Director at PwC Netherlands. Here are the actionable key takeaways from this conversation. Number 1. Set up diverse and intelligent pilots. PwC Netherlands began with 300 AI enthusiasts across various departments and seniority levels. This approach allowed them to test feasibility, usability, and effectiveness while considering data confidentiality. Create pilots that include people from across teams, departments, seniority, and AI mindsets to discover where AI can most benefit your organization. Number 2. Take a phased approach to scaling. PwC Netherlands scaled from 300 to 2,000, then to 4,500, and eventually to all 6,000 employees. This phased approach allows for continuous learning and improvement. Involve HR or people teams in the process as AI adoption requires workforce transformation. Plan your AI adoption in phases, allowing for feedback and adjustments between each stage. Number 3. Integrate AI into daily workflows. To combat the risk of people using AI once and then stopping due to unmet expectations, PwC Netherlands focused on making AI tools like Copilot an integral part of employees' daily work. Some practical efforts include integrating AI into commonly used tools like Teams, Excel, and PowerPoint, encouraging middle managers to remind and enable AI use in their teams, highlighting best practices through user-submitted use cases and prompt libraries, and making AI learning playful through games like AI-themed escape rooms. And number 4, cultivate AI influencers. PwC Netherlands identified natural influences within the organization using organizational network analysis. To find and nurture influencers, use people analytics to identify the most connected individuals, hold office hours where influencers can answer questions, publicly celebrate and recognize influencers' contributions, and engage them at every step of the AI adoption journey. Point number 5, balance experimentation with strategy. Marlene emphasized that successful AI implementation requires a clear strategy and willingness to learn through hands-on experimentation. Develop a clear AI strategy for your organization, but remain flexible and open to learning from real-world experiences. And finally, implement AI in the loop for fairness. PwC Netherlands focuses on integrating AI into human workflows rather than the other way around. This approach helps address biases in AI models and ensures that AI supports human processes rather than replacing them. Consider bringing your company data into AI models to make them more bespoke for your organization's policies and culture. By following these strategies and tactics, you can create a more effective and inclusive AI adoption process in your organization, leading to improved workflows and employee experience. Join me again next week when I speak with another AI leader who's transforming their organization. And if you like this episode, please hit subscribe or give this podcast 5 stars on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. To be the first to get updates on new episodes, subscribe at flexos.work/AI.